Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, July 11th, 2024. Senate Democrats hear from senior officials in President Joe Biden's reelection campaign about their strategy for victory, as concerns about the president's health and fitness continue to be raised 2 weeks after his performance at the debate with expected Republican rival, former President Donald Trump. President Biden himself will answer questions on that topic when he holds a news conference tonight at the conclusion of the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. At that summit, President Biden meeting today with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, announcing a $225 million aid package, which includes a Patriot missile system for air defense against Russian strikes. U.S. House of Representatives votes down a resolution to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in inherent contempt of Congress and fine him $10,000 per day. He does not turn over audio tapes from President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur in the classified documents case. That is the interview where the special counsel described the president as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. House today also defeats a fiscal year 2025 legislative branch spending bill. Senate Judiciary Committee does not approve a judicial nominee from the president. That nominee, as a magistrate judge, recommended that a transgender inmate convicted of child sex abuse be transferred to a women's prison. Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff of Georgia joined all Republicans on the committee in voting no. And the FDIC chair nominee, Christy Goldsmith Romero, tells the Senate Banking Committee her plans to address findings that the agency workplace was rife with sexual harassment, stalking, and abuse by managers. Senate Democrats meeting privately today with two of President Biden's reelection campaign senior advisors, Mike Donilon and Steve Ricchetti, and the chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon. NBC News reports the meeting comes as anxieties grow among Democrats about Biden's diminished standing in the presidential race against Donald Trump in the wake of his halting debate performance on June 27th, as polling averages show that his position has slipped, albeit modestly. Many Democrats don't believe Biden can win, and they worry he may drag down the party's ticket with him, potentially handing Republicans control of Congress as well. They want answers from Biden's team about their plan to turn things around. That was from NBC News. The meeting was held at the DSCC, Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, across the street from the Capitol and Senate office buildings. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, told reporters outside the meeting that he wants to see more data showing that President Biden can beat Donald Trump.
You told me that you were waiting to see the data and analytics to see if there was a path to victory for President Biden.
I need more data, more analytics to allay my concerns, but more important, I think Joe Biden has to take the fight to Donald Trump and allay the American people's concerns. And I think he is capable of doing it, but he has to show the American people the clear contrast and the existential threat that Donald Trump represents to American democracy.
What about
Senator Blumenthal, from what you heard in the
Sunday?
room, are any of your concerns allayed from what you heard from Biden campaign staffers today?
Some of my concerns are allayed. Some others have been deepened. I need more of the kind of analytics that show the path to success. More important than my concerns are the questions that have been raised by the American people that Donald Trump is an existential threat. Joe Biden has to go to the American people, not just in one meeting, one press conference, one speech, but consistently and constantly. Tonight will be important. The press conference will be potentially a turning point, but it has to be more than just one press conference.
How does this end? Like, does he just hang out there with people having concerns until November?
Joe Biden has to continue consistently and aggressively making his case to the American people about what's at stake in this election and drawing the contrast between himself in fighting for the American people and Donald Trump caring only about himself. He has to take the fight to Donald Trump, and he has to do it personally. It can't be done for him. His advisors or staff can't do it for him.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, speaking to reporters outside the special Senate Democratic Caucus luncheon today with advisors to the Biden reelection campaign. He mentioned that news conference. President Biden will be holding a news conference at the conclusion of the NATO summit, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. We'll have live coverage on C-SPAN radio and television, and after, you can find the full video at our website, cspan.org. New Republican Congressional reporter Grace Seegers posting on X, some Democratic senators up for re-election did not attend the meeting with Biden campaign officials today. Sherrod Brown of Ohio, John Tester of Montana, and Tim Kaine of Virginia. Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat of New Hampshire, also spoke to reporters outside the meeting.
Do you think senators' concerns were allayed in there?
I think people are still talking. We obviously have some different perspectives about how best to proceed. But again, the president's team made a very strong presentation, and I continue to support the re-election of President Biden.
Senator Manchin thinks that there will be a decision perhaps Sunday. What do you think of that timeline?
The timeline, the president has indicated he is running for re-election and will continue to stay in the race. And as far as I know, that's what I would expect him to do. What I think we need to be focused on, of course, is the significant contrast. President Biden had a bad debate. Former President Trump not only had a bad debate in which he lied and indicated his willingness to just make things up, but he had a really horrific presidency, and that's what we need to focus on.
What convinced you inside of there? What was the selling point?
I've continued to support the president. This is a really strong campaign. This is a very close race. We always knew it would be a close race, and we've got the resources and the strategy to make the case. Here's President Biden, one of the most successful presidents, if not the most successful president of my lifetime, who has helped lower costs, who is fighting to protect a woman's individual freedom, who has reinvigorated and expanded NATO to keep us safe, secure, and free, and contrast that with former President Trump, who cozies up to dictators, who would support Vladimir Putin in invading Ukraine, and who has made us even more divisive and has bragged about appointing the judges who have taken away a woman's most fundamental right. I think the case is a very strong one, and I look forward to making it. Thank you, guys.
Make you more confident?
Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire, speaking with reporters, camped on the sidewalk outside the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee headquarters, not far from the Capitol building, where Democratic senators met today with Biden-Harris campaign staff. A roll call summarizing it following a meeting with President Joe Biden's top campaign aides. Senate Democrats showed no signs of trying to convince the president to end his re-election bid, but they said he must show more vigor to prevent a full rebellion. And the Washington Post reports on a memo from the president's campaign staff, sent to staff and obtained by the Post, the newspaper says, in which, quote, campaign officials acknowledge real movement away from Biden among voters since the debate, though they suggest that does not constitute a sea change in the state of the race. The memo suggests that Biden is relying on the must-win blue wall states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The memo describes those states as within the margin of error, while the Sun Belt states are not out of reach, far from a strong endorsement of Biden's chances. That's how the article of the Washington Post puts it. One Democratic senator, Peter Welch of Vermont, has openly called for President Biden to leave the race for president this year. On the House side, at least 11 Democrats have publicly called for President Biden to withdraw. The latest today, Brad Schneider of Illinois. A Spectrum News article reads that House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, has not provided any guidance to members of his caucus on the matter. He neither criticized the president nor gave him any ringing endorsements Thursday. It was describing a news conference held by Congressman Jeffries.
NBC News just in the last few minutes moved some reporting that several of President Biden's closest allies now say that he has zero chances of winning. A direct quote is, he needs to drop out from one Biden campaign official. He will never recover from this. After the week and a half that we've had, do you agree? Is it time?
Throughout this week, as House Democrats, we have engaged in a process of talking to each other. Those conversations have been candid, comprehensive, and clear-eyed, and they continue. Until that process has concluded, I'm not going to address what any outside stakeholders may have to say about this
But
matter.
sir, how much longer can you allow the griping to go on before it ultimately wounds him?
House Democrats, Senate Democrats, and President Biden are unified on the affirmative agenda that we have for the American people related to lowering housing costs or ending price gouging or growing the middle class, defending democracy, and fighting for reproductive freedom. President Biden, House Democrats, and Senate Democrats are also united in pushing back against Project 2025 and the extreme MAGA Republican agenda. That's unifying, not dividing us.
Leader Jeffries, President Biden has said he's staying in this race, but after your conversations throughout this week, do you think it's time for him to reconsider that based on what you're hearing?
Our conversations have been candid, comprehensive, and clear-eyed, and they are ongoing.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill. As that reporter said, President Biden has said now for 2 weeks since the presidential debate with Donald Trump, he's staying in the presidential race. His running mate for re-election, Vice President Kamala Harris, campaigned today in Greensboro, North Carolina.
We are today 117 days out from the election. And I know many of us have been involved in these elections every 4 years, and nearly every time we say, this is the one. This here is the one. This is the one. The most existential, consequential, and important election of our lifetime. Now, we always knew this election would be tough, and the past few days have been a reminder that running for President of the United States is never easy, nor should it be. But one thing we know about our president, Joe Biden, is that he is a fighter. He is a fighter. And he is the first to say, when you get knocked down, you get back up. You get back up. So we will continue to fight, and we will continue to organize, and in November we will win. We will win, because we know what's at stake. And in this election, there can be no doubt who you can count on to fight for you when it counts. It's simple. President Biden and I fight for the American people. Donald Trump does not. He fights for himself.
Vice President Kamala Harris at a rally in Greensboro, North Carolina today. Story from Axios. House Democrats are poised to issue a flood of new statements urging Joe Biden to exit the 2024 race, regardless of what happens at the president's NATO press conference. More than half a dozen lawmakers tell Axios. While some House Democrats view the press conference as a key hurdle for Biden to clear, many have already decided to urge Biden to withdraw, one lawmaker said. Others are getting closer to that decision, the lawmaker added. Another House Democrat told Axios, this whole discussion isn't over just because of the way the election is turning away from us. Maybe the press conference will have an effect, but I'm not sure that changes the net dynamics of the race. That was the article from Axios. That news conference with President Biden at the Washington, D.C. Convention Center, where the NATO summit is being held, scheduled for 6:30 p.m. Eastern. We'll have live coverage on C-SPAN radio and television. And then after, you can find the full video at our website, cspan.org. And today is the final day of the NATO summit. The White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was asked during a virtual audio news conference about how President Biden has been received by the leaders of the other NATO countries.
Jake, obviously this is taking place in the context of the president's domestic political situation. He's talked a lot about how America is back on the world stage. What have you or the president had any conversation with any world leaders or any of your counterparts expressing concern about the president's standing here at home and the potential return to a Trump administration?
I haven't heard that in the president's conversations with his counterparts. What I have heard as they went around the table yesterday in the North Atlantic Council session, a session just with the NATO allies, was a drumbeat of praise for the United States, but also for President Biden personally, for what he's done to strengthen NATO, especially as president, but also over the course of his entire career. And leaders really made a point of reinforcing their gratitude to him on that. The president met with the Prime Minister of the UK yesterday. That conversation was extended and substantive, particularly on Ukraine, on the situation in the Middle East, and on how we carry forward the special relationship under new leadership in the UK. So the focus here really has been on the substance. It's been on what we're trying to deliver for the defense of the alliance and deliver for Ukraine and deliver in our partnerships with the Indo-Pacific. It hasn't been on politics.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan speaking to reporters in a virtual audio news conference. And President Joe Biden continuing his meetings today. Associated Press reports that he announced a new $225 million aid package for Ukraine on Thursday, including a Patriot missile system to bolster its air defenses against the deadly onslaught of Russian airstrikes. Biden made the announcement during a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who called the announcement strong news, but pressed that for the immediate future, what the Ukrainians also need is U.S. permission to fire the long-range missiles it has provided at targets deeper inside Russia. Reporting from Associated Press, here are those two leaders at the Washington, D.C. Convention Center at the NATO summit.
Over the past few months, the battlefield in Ukraine has shifted, but Ukraine stopped Russia for Kharkiv, number one, and you should be complimented for that. Number two, you've blunted Russia's advances. You've imposed significant cost on Russia, and you made it clear Russia will not prevail in Ukraine, will not prevail in Ukraine. Ukraine will prevail. And I want you to know we're going to be with you every step of the way. 2 days ago, I announced a historic donation of air defense equipment to Ukraine. Today, I'm proud to announce a new security assistance package for Ukraine. This will be the 8th package I've authorized since we've signed the national security bill. The Secretary of Defense, we can talk about what the details of all that are. I signed it yesterday, or last night, I guess. And we're working with our NATO allies to ensure Ukraine is flying F-16s this summer. And we show the world that we stand with Ukraine now and in the future. So, Mr. President, thank you again for being here. We got a lot of work to do together, and I yield the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you very much for the invitation to summit, and thank you for such strong news about new security package. I'm grateful to you, your team, your administration, of course, Congress, both parties, both chambers, and all Americans for their vital and your strong support of Ukrainian people. Together we are saving lives of our people. You mentioned about Kharkiv. Thanks to your support and thanks to our soldiers. Really, it was tough work, but they did it. And together we are preserving Ukraine's independence and freedom. And these are historic actions that will protect the world from similar wars. And I especially want to thank today President Biden for his support and personal statement following the Russian strike on the children's hospital in Kyiv. Yes, this is our largest children's hospital, and it was direct hit by Russian missile. That is why we greatly appreciate your decisions to strengthen our air defense, the 5 new Patriots and dozens of other systems.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meeting President Joe Biden at the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. From the Canadian press, senior officials from the Canadian and U.S. governments say a new trilateral agreement with Finland will help allies build icebreakers to safeguard the Arctic. The Ice Pact, as it's being called, is aimed at bolstering shipbuilding capabilities in the 3 countries to deter Russian and Chinese ambitions in the far north. The deal was signed on the sidelines of the NATO summit, which is wrapping up today in Washington, D.C. Finland is one of NATO's newest members. U.S. officials who spoke to reporters about the deal said they anticipate allies will want to build between 70 and 90 icebreakers in the coming years, and they want domestic shipyards to gain from that production. That was reporting from the Canadian press. And this from Politico, the U.S. plans to shut down the controversial Gaza humanitarian pier in relatively short order, ending a 3-month saga that saw the U.S. military struggle to deliver vital aid to the enclave. Speaking to reporters at the NATO Public Forum in Washington on Thursday, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said, "I do anticipate in relatively short order we'll wind down pier operations in the Gaza Strip." The Pentagon later said in a statement that troops had failed to successfully re-anchor the pier onto the shore of the Gaza Strip due to technical and weather-related issues. Politico also says that Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, who has criticized the Biden administration for insufficiently supporting the Israeli government as it wages war against militant group Hamas, tried to force a Senate floor vote on a resolution Thursday under the auspices of the War Powers Act to end the use of the military for the pier's operations. That was from Politico. Here is some of what happened on the Senate floor, starting with Senator Ted Cruz.
Mr. President, the Gaza pier is a perfect example of the Biden administration's foreign policy incoherence. This was a nearly $500 million stunt trying to buy a few votes in Michigan. It's been an unconscionable waste of American taxpayer dollars, and simultaneously it has undermined America's geopolitical credibility with our allies. The pier is unnecessary. We can debate whether sufficient aid is getting to the Gaza Strip, but I believe that our Israeli allies have taken unprecedented steps to ensure that indeed there is. I understand that many Democrats disagree. What is undeniable, however, is that whatever aid is coming in, it has not, will not, and indeed could not have come through this godforsaken pier. The operation was simply too insignificant and too convoluted. Moreover, we know that Hamas diverts aid delivered through this pier. The pier has also been reportedly attacked by Palestinian terrorists, and 3 U.S. service members have been injured because of pier operations. Further, the pier has cost American taxpayers a minimum of $320 million to construct. And that was an estimate from April, so it is surely higher now. Meanwhile, we have required our Israeli allies to provide a, quote, security bubble around the pier. We are pressuring them to protect this operation, which is bringing supplies hijacked by Hamas. And Mr. President, Joe Biden is asking Israel to protect the Gaza pier from Hamas while denying Israel the weapons to counter Hamas.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, today on the Senate floor. Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, Foreign Relations Committee chair, then made a point of order against Senator Ted Cruz's resolution, saying the War Powers Act doesn't apply in this case.
This resolution does not seek to remove U.S. forces from hostility, but rather to end a specific mission. The war powers is to deal with our military troops, not to deal with tactical military and non-military actions. The Senate should not allow the privileged vehicle intended for entirely different purposes to be used as a backdoor efforts to stop humanitarian assistance. So let me be clear about this. American boots are not on the ground in Gaza. U.S. troops are operating the pier in question, are not engaged in hostilities or carrying out a mission that requires the authorization of the use of military force. They are facilitating the delivery of food, water, and other basic humanitarian assistance. The supplies are not even being delivered by U.S. forces.
Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland and chair of the Foreign Relations Committee on the Senate floor. The Senate voted to sustain that point of order by a vote of 48 to 46, meaning that Senator Cruz could not bring up his resolution. Article today from Reuters, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday accused Palestinian militant group Hamas of making demands and talks on a possible ceasefire in Gaza that contradict a framework deal brokered by Washington. While Netanyahu spoke, some residents of Gaza City were trapped in houses and bodies lay uncollected in the streets after an intense new Israeli assault that Hamas says could wreck the prospects of a ceasefire. That article from Reuters. Washington Today continues in a moment.
C-SPAN, where history unfolds daily. In 1979, C-SPAN was created as a public service by America's cable television companies. And today, we continue to take you to Congress and other public policy events in Washington, D.C. and around the country. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast, wherever you find your podcasts, and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. Article from Roll Call. The House rejected an inherent contempt resolution against Attorney General Merrick B. Garland on Thursday, foiling a Republican attempt to ramp up pressure to release audio of a special counsel interview with President Joe Biden. The measure from Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican of Florida, rejected 204 to 210, would fine the Attorney General $10,000 a day until he complies with congressional subpoenas for the recording. Several Republicans joined with Democrats in voting against the resolution. The measure was the latest in a months-long push from House Republicans to get the audio recording of former Special Counsel Robert Hur's interview with the president, which took place as part of a probe into Biden's handling of classified materials. Hur's report characterized Biden's memory as significantly limited in his interview with the special counsel's office. That report was released in February, months before Biden's debate performance last month that raised concerns among Democrats over his mental sharpness and stamina. A transcript of Hur's interview with Biden is available to the public, but the president has invoked executive privilege over the audio. Merrick Garland has said that releasing the audio would chill cooperation with the department in future investigations. And on Wednesday, former President Donald Trump signaled support for the resolution from Congresswoman Luna. That was from Roll Call. The House vote was today. The debate took place Wednesday on the House floor, starting with that sponsor, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna.
In order for the House of Representatives to do its job, we must have access to the information that will allow us to make informed decisions on behalf of our constituents. With Attorney General Garland and the Department of Justice refusing to follow the law, we have been left with no choice but to rely on inherent contempt, our constitutional authority to hold an individual accountable for refusing to comply with congressional demands. Inherent contempt is within our Article 1 authority. It was first used in 1795 and was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1821 in Anderson v. Dunn. Since then, it has been reaffirmed many times by court. If we fail to hold Garland accountable, we will signal to whoever controls the White House it is impervious to congressional oversight and that the constitutionally recognized power of the House of Representatives is merely a suggestion and not to be taken seriously. If an American is presented with a lawful subpoena, he or she is expected that they comply or face the consequences of their defiance. Why should the Attorney General of the United States be held to a different standard? No one is above the law. We have reached a turning point where the urgency of this situation cannot be overlooked. And I want to remind my colleagues that House Republicans have already argued that Merrick Garland must be held accountable for defying 2 lawfully issued subpoenas. Today's vote will hold Attorney General Garland in inherent contempt of Congress and fine him $10,000 per day until he complies with our subpoenas by turning over the audio tapes. Over the past couple of days, I have heard false statements being made about this resolution, one of which was a claim that that this violated a bill of attainder. This is simply untrue. In fact, the Supreme Court rejected the idea that inherent contempt is a bill of attainder in the 1927 case McGrain versus Doherty. This means that it is a constitutional right and within our authority under necessary and proper clause. Another false statement is that a fine cannot be paid with the appropriated money. However, this resolution clearly states that it is personal funds that will be used. I would like to remind my colleagues that that this Congress is not subordinate to the executive branch. It never has been and it never will be. This resolution will protect the integrity and independence of the legislative branch. And to each one of my colleagues, your constituents and this institution are relying on you to be on the right side of law and order.
Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, on the House floor. Congressman James McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, opposed the resolution.
This is a stupid resolution. Republican leadership knows this is a stupid resolution. Their own members know this is a stupid resolution, but they're beholden to the craziest MAGA members in their conference. And so this is what we get. Stupid resolutions on the floor because they're too chicken to stand up to the extremism in their own party. The Attorney General turned over the exact transcripts of the interviews that Republicans demanded. But that wasn't good enough, because this isn't about a dispute over a recording. Let's be real. Republicans want to get these recordings because they think the RNC can use them in attack ads. This is Republicans weaponizing the government to go after their political opponents, and it is sick. It is sick. The hypocrisy on the other side is stunning. It takes my breath away, Mr. Speaker. Jim Jordan, Andy Biggs, Scott Perry, all ignored congressional subpoenas. I go right down the list. Former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, former Attorney General William Barr, former Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, former Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino, all ordered to testify. And what did they do? They ran and hid, following the lead, by the way, of their corrupter-in-chief, Donald Trump, who ignored his own congressional subpoena. It's like a national pastime for Republicans, golf, fishing, and ignoring subpoenas. And now they have the nerve to come down here and lecture anyone about the rule of law. Get lost. Get lost. Get out of here with this nonsense.
Congressman James McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, on the House floor on Wednesday. The debate on the resolution was Wednesday. The vote was today, and it failed, 204 to 210. 4 Republicans voted no along with Democrats. John Duarte, David Joyce, Michael Turner, and Tom McClintock, and the sponsor, Anna Paulina Luna, writing on X that the defeat was due to some Republican absences, and she's refiled, she says, the resolution, and we'll call it up again in a couple of weeks. Another article from Roll Call, the House rejected a fiscal 2025 legislative branch spending bill Thursday as some Republicans rebelled against language to block a pay raise for lawmakers, as well as the overall funding increase the measure would provide. The 205 to 213 vote marked the first defeat this year of Republican-written appropriations bills that Democrats have united against. 4 of the 12 annual bills passed on party line votes in recent weeks. The legislative branch bill, which is the smallest of the 12 bills and traditionally among the easiest to pass, derailed momentum that could undermine GOP hopes of passing all dozen bills in the House before the August recess. That was from Roll Call. Congressman David Valadao, Republican of California, is the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on the legislative branch, and he spoke in favor of the bill before the vote.
The recommendation for the fiscal year 2025 legislative branch appropriations bill provides $5.546 billion, excluding Senate items, which are traditionally left to the Senate to determine. The bill supports the legislative branch as an essential branch of government and ensures the House is open to and works for the American people. Regardless of what side of the aisle you are on, we can agree that our greatest duty is to our constituents and that this bill funds our ability to advocate on their behalf. It invests in the resources necessary to provide robust oversight of the executive branch. It also includes modest increases to ensure the safety of the Capitol complex and the work of the Capitol Police, as well as the institutions that support our work, such as the Library of Congress and the Government Accountability Office. I believe the bill balances the legislative branch's capacity to effectively serve the American people in a fiscally responsible manner.
Congressman David Valadao, Republican from California, chair of the Legislative Branch Appropriations Subcommittee, on the House floor today. An article from The Hill notes that the bill would also decrease funding for the architect of the Capitol, the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, and joint items including the Joint Economic Committee and Joint Committee on Taxation. Congressman Adriano Espaillat, Democrat of New York, ranking member on the Legislative Branch Appropriations Subcommittee, said on the House floor today he didn't oppose the funding levels in the bill, but he did speak against policy provisions known as riders.
I agree with the chairman when he says this bill provides the resources for Congress to serve their constituents and conduct our oversight responsibilities. The funding in this bill is reasonable and continues the operations for legislative branch agencies. However, Mr. Chairman, the legislative branch bill should never be a place for divisive politics. The legislative branch bill should be used to ensure Congress has the tools, the necessary tools it needs to legislate and support the constituents we serve in a fair, transparent, and equitable manner. Instead, and unfortunately, this bill contains some very concerning messaging provisions that have no place, absolutely no place, within the legislative branch appropriations bill. This bill contains provisions that eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and allows for discrimination towards the LGBTQI plus community. The majority seems obsessed with cutting federal funding and eliminating programs that help fight climate change and those that help grow and diversify our country. For example, this bill removes a provision to eliminate or reduce plastic waste right here in this legislative branch government. We should start by leading with our own example. To save the planet, we should start right here in our House. In addition, it eliminates a requirement for members to lease low emissions vehicles. Yes, as we face a tremendous heat wave, I challenge anybody to walk back to Longworth or Rayburn 3 or 4 times today to see how much of a challenge it will be. Yet, we don't want to accept the provisions that were before enacted to have climate change impact provisions on the bill. Plus, this bill does not include long-standing legislation allowing the legislative branch agencies to employ individuals with an employment authorization document under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival Program, DACA. This House and many agencies that make up the entire legislative branch of government should make every effort to reflect and consider all the people in this great nation we serve and the many districts our members represent.
Congressman Adriano Espaillat, Democrat from New York, ranking member on the Legislative Branch Appropriations Subcommittee, speaking on the House floor today before the House voted not to pass the bill he was describing. It was a vote of 205 to 213, 10 Republicans voting no, 3 Democrats voted yes. The 10 Republicans voting no: Andy Biggs of Arizona, Tim Burchett of Tennessee, Andrew Clyde of Georgia, Matt Gaetz of Florida, Eli Crane of Arizona, Bob Good of Virginia, Debbie Lesko of Arizona, Ralph Norman of South Carolina, Matt Rosendale of Montana, and Keith Self of Texas. Story from the Washington Examiner: a controversial judicial nominee from President Joe Biden was defeated on Thursday by the Senate Judiciary Committee. The Democratic-led panel voted 10-11 against Magistrate Judge Sarah Netburn to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, with Senator John Ossoff, Democrat of Georgia, as the lone Democrat to side with all Republicans. Ossoff's office did not respond to a request for comment. Netburn's nomination has been embroiled in controversy for months over her connections to a 2022 case involving a transgender female being sent to a women's prison despite being a convicted child rapist and distributor of child pornography. That was the article from the Washington Examiner. Here is some of today's meeting at the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, speaking against the nomination.
According to that same article in the Free Beacon, this inmate pulled his member from his pants and was flaunting it, wagging it at his female inmates. That is not the behavior of a female inmate. That is the behavior of a dangerous criminal, especially when you understand that this guy is a serial rapist who had raped people and committed sexual assaults and engaged in all kinds of violent criminal behavior over a period of decades. He'd spent a little bit of time out of prison, but he'd get out of prison, he'd reoffend again. Now, many female inmates, it's widely understood, many female inmates have themselves been the victims of sexual assault, rape, and other acts of violence long before they became incarcerated. Just imagine the trauma that they have to endure merely by having to share prison facilities with a male prisoner before he even goes and does something like that, before he goes out and starts engaging in exhibitionist lewd acts. This is not fair to them. And the judgment reflected by this magistrate judge, who we're now considering for a lifetime appointment to the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, this is not fair to the inmates. This is itself its own Eighth Amendment violation. I couldn't disagree more with Judge Netburn's conclusion that it would have violated the Eighth Amendment not to send this male prisoner to a female prison. Now, this is, lest we get caught in thinking that this is just a mere partisan divide, this is just Republicans and Democrats disagreeing. Only in Washington could that pass for plausible analysis. Anywhere else, this is madness. This is nuts. This is insanity.
Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, at today's Judiciary Committee meeting to consider the Sarah Netburn judicial nomination. The committee chair, Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, also gave a statement.
Senator Graham sent questions for the record to Judge Sarah Netburn, and she responded to a question directly on this case. I want to read her response. Before I do, I want to make it clear this has not been mentioned and should have been. She was a magistrate at the time. Magistrates perform an important function in our court system, but is limited. It's not the same authority as a district court judge, and that's relevant to their response. The question asked by Senator Graham on behalf of his side is, do you stand by this decision, the JJS versus W.L. Plyler decision today? Her response, yes. I faithfully applied the law to the facts in reaching my recommendation. The district judge adopted my report and recommendation and concluded that it was, quote, thorough, detailed, and well-reasoned. I issued only a recommendation pursuant to my authority under 28 U.S.C. 636B. I did not order the Bureau of Prisons to do anything. The district judge ordered the Bureau of Prisons to transfer the petitioner to a female facility. The Bureau of Prisons did not move or for a stay or otherwise challenge the district judge's order. In the approximately 18 months since the district judge ordered the Bureau of Prisons to transfer the petitioner to a female facility, I have received regular status letters, none of which reports any disciplinary or safety issues. The Bureau of Prisons is in negotiations with the petitioner to voluntarily settle any remaining claims. The point in reading that response in its entirety is that as a magistrate, she did not have the authority to order this man into the Bureau of Prisons or out of the Bureau of Prisons. That authority resided in the district court judge. I ask unanimous consent without objection to enter that judge's decision, Judge Vernon Broderick, into the record without objection.
Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, at today's meeting. The committee voted 10 yes and 11 no on the Sarah Netburn nomination to be U.S. District Court Judge for the Southern District of New York, so that nomination will not be sent to the full Senate for consideration. The no votes came from all Republicans and one Democrat, John Ossoff of Georgia. Story from Reuters: Republican senators questioned the experience of Christy Goldsmith Romero to lead the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, or fix its cultural issues, raising the possibility they may try to block the nomination as the agency's new chair. Goldsmith Romero strongly rebutted their assertions, pledging to overhaul the FDIC, and said on Thursday she would be inclined to solicit more feedback on contentious proposed bank capital hikes in a potential win for banks that have been calling for a rethink. A Democratic member of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Goldsmith Romero was nominated by President Joe Biden last month to replace Martin Gruenberg, who is stepping down after a probe found widespread sexual harassment and other misconduct at the bank watchdog. That reporting from Reuters. Here's part of that hearing. Nominee appearing before the Senate Banking Committee, and the chair is Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio.
The FDIC suffered from significant long-standing workplace culture issues. It's been described as misogynistic, patriarchal, insular, outdated, good old boys club. Significant changes necessary because FDIC employees deserve a workplace free from discrimination and abuse and harassment. How do you go about addressing these long-standing issues that appear to be deeply ingrained through FDIC chairs of both parties for far too many years, did seem to be ingrained in the agency's culture?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I mean, when I read the report, it reads like a bygone era, particularly for women and minorities and members of the LGBTQ plus community. So I'll learn more if confirmed and I can get in there, but let me give you my top line thoughts. The first is to modernize the federal workplace to one that has the best practices that you would expect to see in federal workplaces. that invests in staff morale and values and supports employees. The second is to herald the employees and managers that have been doing the right thing. Third, I'd send a clear message that harassment and discrimination and retaliation will not be tolerated. So that includes investigations and holding people accountable, and I can say that the conduct in the report would warrant multiple removals. Additionally, we need to put in place what is the normal standard federal EEO process for complaints, and then encourage people to use it rather than have them live in fear. I would change the litigation adverse culture so that problems could be addressed right away rather than moved around or kick the can down the road. And then the era of each office being a fiefdom would be over. There would not be 70 plus FDICs. There'd be one FDIC with all employees in all offices following the same rules the same way.
Christy Goldsmith Romero, nominated to be the head of the FDIC, questioned by Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, chair of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, at today's confirmation hearing. More from the Reuters article. An attorney with a background in enforcement, Goldsmith Romero is backed by Democratic progressives, but is generally seen as a non-contentious pick and has influential supporters in some Republican circles. She was unanimously confirmed by the Senate twice before. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 32, NASDAQ down 364, S&P down 49. Ben Sasse, former U.S. Senator, Republican from Nebraska, and now University of Florida president, spoke today at the National Governors Association summer meeting in Salt Lake City about the NGA chair's initiative, Disagree Better. Ben Sasse described how Alexis de Tocqueville's study of America in the mid-1800s provides lessons for today.
We Europeans think you either have community, which must be enforced by the state, or you have a bunch of weirdos living off in a cabin by themselves in Montana as isolated individualists writing some weird treatise, right? You've got isolated individualism or you've got state-enforced community. And he's like, no, these Americans, they believe in this other thing, which is community, but voluntary. You persuade people to marry you. The marriage isn't arranged. You persuade people to join your church or religious or synagogue. You don't get a charter from the state to collect taxes. You persuade people to buy your product. You don't get a charter from the government that says, I'm the only one who gets to operate on this trade line. And he said, Americans have this unbelievable idea that you have to actually compete and persuade, and you do it with love and argument and innovation. You don't do it with compulsion and power and shout down. And so America becomes unbelievably dynamic, and I still think one of the most interesting ways to understand America is through Tocqueville's eyes and saying, if you believe in souls, and you believe that souls can't be compelled, therefore a whole bunch of things about community and persuasion and voluntarism flow from that, and that's America. Here's the problem. That worked in the New England town village, and it ended up working in a whole bunch of urban ethnic neighborhoods. How does it work in a place where you're mostly living off in communities somewhere on this? And we haven't figured out the answer to that problem, and that's the challenge before us. The future is going to be hybrid, and we have to build new Tocquevillian institutions for a world where you partly are in community with people bodily. It matters to hug. It matters to break bread together. It matters to have your feet touch the ground and actually play in sports. But there's a lot about the digital revolution that's pretty dang extraordinary, that you can also convene communities that are asynchronous or sometimes synchronous but non-co-local. And right now we don't have the founding wave of new Tocquevillian institutions for a hybrid era, and we're always going to live in a hybrid era.
Ben Sasse, former U.S. Senator, Republican from Nebraska, and he is now University of Florida president at the National Governors Association summer meeting in Salt Lake City. The this he was talking about, he was holding up, of course, a smartphone. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.